At 2:14 a.m., a car quietly entered a restricted service gate at Kensington Palace. No photographers, no staff rotation, no scheduled security entry. Yet within minutes, a sealed velvet case was logged into the Royal Inventory Register and signed for personally. By sunrise, the necklace Catherine had worn publicly only hours earlier was gone. No statement, no explanation. And by midday, palace aides were pretending it had never existed. Before we start, your support through a like and subscribe means a lot. Thank you. Only hours before that entry, the atmosphere had been entirely different. The gala had begun like so many carefully choreographed royal evenings. Controlled smiles, measured greetings, familiar heirlooms reappearing for tradition's sake. Then Catherine stepped forward wearing something no one recognized. Not a known tiara reset into a necklace. Not a diplomatic gift previously catalogued. Not a piece from the late Queen's documented favorites. The diamonds sat heavier than fashion required, arranged with a deliberate authority that immediately redirected every conversation in the room. Even seasoned correspondents paused mid-sentence. Cameras lingered longer than protocol usually allowed. Within minutes, speculation surged. Commentators tried to match it to archives. Social media analysts compared stone cuts to coronation sets. None aligned. The excitement grew sharper because the palace press office remained unusually silent. Normally, a description would arrive within minutes. Provenance, era, a comforting story of continuity. Instead, reporters received a single phrase: private collection. The absence of detail created its own gravity. Inside the reception, however, attention shifted from the jewel to Catherine herself. Observers who had watched her for years sensed something unsettled beneath the polished composure. Her posture stayed perfect, yet her hands returned repeatedly to the clasp at the back of her neck, not adjusting but confirming. Conversations shortened. Laughter ended a fraction too early. One aide later described it as the first time she seemed aware of what she was wearing, rather than simply wearing it. Security logs later revealed a break in routine. After official departure, there was no courier request, no packing team, no overnight holding procedure. Instead, a personal instruction moved through channels that normally required committees. The case was prepared immediately. A vehicle cleared the inner perimeter long after staff rotations ended. Hand delivery, the kind reserved for constitutional documents, replaced standard transport protocols. Morning papers complicated matters further. Photographs from the event appeared, but tighter crops replaced wider frames. Some agencies carried only waist-up images. A fashion columnist quietly noted an image set had been withdrawn after initial publication. Questions multiplied faster than clarifications. By late morning, a background explanation began circulating. The necklace had been a temporary loan. Yet palace correspondents quickly realized the timeline didn't fit. Loans are processed days in advance, not reclaimed before dawn. And so, the whispers began. Not about style, but about significance. Something had been introduced, recognized, and removed before it could become part of the record. Which meant the mystery wasn't merely why she returned it. The deeper mystery was why it had been offered at all. But to understand why the necklace vanished overnight, we have to ask a more unsettling question. Where did it come from in the first place? Royal jewels are catalogued down to the millimeter. Historians know the movement of stones across centuries. Yet, this necklace appeared from nowhere. No museum archive, no exhibition photo, no coronation inventory. Even veteran royal reporters admitted privately they had never seen it before. And when researchers requested documentation, the palace library restricted access to 3 entire decades of records. The absence was louder than any confirmation could have been. For generations, royal collections have followed a comforting rhythm. A tiara reappears at a state banquet. A brooch surfaces at a remembrance service. A necklace passes quietly from queen to consort to princess, each appearance reinforcing continuity. But this piece disrupted that rhythm. Experts began tracing stone shapes, clasp construction, mounting techniques. The cuts suggested age, but not a familiar era. The arrangement implied status, but not a known title. It felt royal, unmistakably royal. Yet it belonged to no chapter anyone could open. Privately, historians compared notes in guarded conversations. Some suggested it had been altered from a larger ceremonial set, long dismantled. Others insisted the craftsmanship hinted at a commission that had never been publicly acknowledged. What unsettled them most was not disagreement, but unanimity. No one had ever documented it before. Not in wartime inventories, not in restoration reports, not even in the personal diaries often relied upon when official ledgers remained silent. Inside the palace, a simpler explanation circulated among staff. They were instructed to call it a family heirloom. The phrase sounded reassuring, but it solved nothing. Royal heirlooms almost always have a remembered wearer. A photograph, a portrait, a story passed down through generations. Yet when aides were gently pressed for details, answers stopped at the same point. No date, no origin, no prior occasion. Just repetition of a label meant to close curiosity rather than satisfy it. The most revealing moment came not from a statement, but from access denied. Researchers requesting routine reference clearance discovered entire sections of the palace archival catalog temporarily unavailable. The restriction covered a span of decades rather than a specific year, suggesting the removal wasn't tied to a single event, but to an era. Even more striking, a senior courtier known for meticulous historical knowledge declined to identify the necklace's previous wearer. Not uncertainty, refusal. The distinction mattered. Uncertainty invites investigation. Refusal signals consequence. Slowly, a different term began circulating in conversations that never reached microphones. Private holdings. Not the crown jewels, not personal gifts, but something in between. Possessions technically owned by the institution, yet withheld from ceremonial life. Pieces that carry weight beyond aesthetics. Objects that, once displayed, would reopen conversations carefully sealed by time. If the necklace had come from there, its brief appearance was not an oversight, but a decision. And decisions in that category are never casual. Because the necklace wasn't just unlisted, it belonged to a category of royal possessions the public is never meant to hear about. Beneath the ceremonial crown jewels lies another collection. One never displayed, never photographed, never insured publicly. Palace staff refer to it only as the reserve. Pieces connected to abdications, scandals, broken engagements, and royal crises. And according to two former aides, the necklace Catherine wore had been sealed there for decades, untouched since a royal dispute that nearly fractured the monarchy. To the public, royal jewels appear permanent and uncomplicated. A crown symbolizes duty. A brooch marks allegiance. A tiara confirms rank. Yet inside the institution, objects are separated not by beauty, but by consequence. The crown jewels represent continuity, the safe history, the narrative that strengthens the present. The reserve represents the opposite. Not falsehood, but memory considered too sharp to carry into ceremony. Every monarchy preserves triumphs. Few openly display the objects tied to regret. Among palace staff, a quiet vocabulary exists. Some pieces are active, others resting. But a small category holds a different label entirely: restricted. These are jewels associated with moments the institution survived, but never wished to revisit. Engagements that collapsed publicly. Power struggles settled privately. Decisions that protected the crown, yet wounded individuals who wore its symbols. The necklace Catherine received belonged to that category, not because of its value, but because of what wearing it once meant. The protocol surrounding such items is deliberate. They are never assigned casually and never offered without senior approval. A monarch's consent is required not merely for usage, but for reappearance. Their return to public view signals acknowledgement of a past event, whether intended or not. Records indicated the necklace had remained undisturbed for decades. Its last removal, logged in a year, remembered more for internal tension than ceremony. After that moment, it disappeared into silence. Not forgotten, but avoided. What complicates the story further is that the decision did not appear coordinated in advance. Accounts suggest William himself had no prior briefing before the gala, learning of the piece's origin only after its selection. Catherine, however, asked a question before wearing it. Not about security, not about fashion compatibility, but about history. That request reportedly delayed preparations. Staff were sent searching for documentation rarely retrieved. The answer she received was given quietly, without written summary, as though repetition alone carried risk. Those present later described a change not in behavior, but in awareness. She continued the evening as expected, yet carried a knowledge few outside the institution could interpret. Wearing royal jewelry normally affirms belonging. Wearing this one placed her inside a conversation that predated her role, a continuation of something unresolved rather than concluded. It meant participation in a narrative still sensitive enough to remain unwritten. The overnight return then appears less sudden and more inevitable. Once history attached itself to the present, the object stopped being decorative and became declarative. Keeping it would acknowledge continuity with the past. Returning it would separate her from it. Either choice spoke. Silence was impossible. And what she learned about its last owner may explain why she removed it within hours. There was one photograph, quickly buried, showing the necklace decades ago on a royal woman whose name is rarely mentioned in official timelines. Her engagement collapsed. Her title vanished. And within a year, she left the country permanently. The jewel was never seen again, until Kate wore it. The palace calls it coincidence. Insiders call it reopening a wound. Within family memory, some names are spoken with ceremony, others with restraint. Hers belonged to the latter. She had once stood at the edge of the institution's future, introduced carefully, presented confidently, then removed from public life with a speed that left the narrative unfinished. Official explanations spoke of incompatibility and personal choice. Private recollections suggested something harsher, a conflict between expectation and autonomy that could not be resolved without someone disappearing from the story. When she departed, the necklace departed with her, as if the object itself carried the argument. Accounts from that period described an abrupt silence. Invitations ceased. Portraits were archived. Even casual references faded from speeches and memoirs, not erased completely, but softened until recognition required deliberate memory. The jewel became part of that quiet retreat. Its absence grew familiar, its history uncomfortable to revisit, because it raised questions the monarchy preferred not to answer publicly. What happens when belonging is withdrawn rather than surrendered? Rumors persisted long after she left. Letters reportedly sealed in the palace archives referenced the necklace directly, not as property, but as symbol. A gift intended to confirm acceptance, a return interpreted as refusal. Whether those letters contained apology or accusation remained unclear, Yet their existence alone suggested the piece had never been neutral. It represented a moment when personal decision collided with institutional permanence, and permanence prevailed. That context changed everything about Catherine's request to know its story. She was not merely selecting jewelry. She was stepping into an echo. Those who briefed her reportedly spoke carefully, aware that explanation itself could influence choice. By the time she entered the gala, she understood the weight attached to the clasp resting at her neck. The evening demanded composure, but knowledge reshaped posture. Observers later described a subtle hesitation whenever conversation turned personal, as though she carried a history she could neither share nor ignore. William's reaction added another layer. Normally at ease during such appearances, he remained unusually attentive, shortening exchanges and adjusting timing around her comfort rather than schedule. Protection replaced routine partnership. To the public, it appeared considerate. To those familiar with royal patterns, it signaled awareness. Something about the necklace had shifted the night from ceremonial to personal. Even commentators trained to analyze public demeanor noticed tension. Small gestures, pauses before greeting, fewer spontaneous interactions, repeated touches near the clasp, suggested not discomfort with attention, but with implication. The object connected past and present in a way neither could fully control. And, if history had repeated once by resurfacing, it risked repeating again by remaining visible. But the past alone doesn't cause a midnight return. Something happened that very evening. Halfway through the reception, Catherine stopped smiling. Witnesses noticed her hand repeatedly touching the clasp. Not adjusting, checking. A short private conversation followed with a senior royal. Minutes later, she skipped an entire scheduled appearance segment. Cameras were redirected, and for the rest of the night, she kept the necklace hidden beneath her gown's collar. Until that moment, the evening had followed familiar rhythm. Polite exchanges, predictable circulation, a choreography refined across decades. Then the tone shifted. The conversation between Catherine and the senior family member was brief but deliberate, the kind of exchange where few words carry more weight than many. Observers nearby sensed formality replacing warmth, not disagreement, recognition. Something understood instantly without explanation. Within minutes, the staff pattern changed. Photographers were subtly repositioned. Angles widened. Close framing became discouraged without announcement. Those responsible for timing adjusted the order of greetings, guiding guests away from prolonged interaction. It did not appear chaotic. It appeared practiced, as though a contingency long prepared had quietly activated. The absence that followed spoke even louder. A scheduled appearance, small but symbolic, was removed from the program entirely. No substitution, no delay, simply omission. Guests waiting for that moment were redirected toward conversation and refreshments, while Catherine remained briefly out of view. During that interval, she made a request not normally made mid-event: access to a private preparation room. Not to change attire, but to consult privately with attendants regarding the piece itself. William's role shifted alongside hers. He shortened conversations, positioning himself closer than usual, guiding departures rather than extending them. The dynamic moved from ceremonial partnership to protective awareness. He did not draw attention, yet he controlled pace, ensuring interactions remained brief and predictable. The evening continued, but its purpose had subtly changed, from presentation to containment. When she returned, the necklace no longer rested openly. The collar of her gown remained higher, movements more measured. Official photographs from later in the night showed the piece only partially visible, its presence implied rather than displayed. Editors would later notice the difference. Earlier images emphasized it. Later ones avoided it. The object had not left the event yet, but it had already begun leaving its role. Amid quiet exchanges between aides, a phrase passed in low voices, repeated enough to become undeniable. It shouldn't have been brought out. Not a complaint, not an accusation, an acknowledgement. The decision to present it had crossed an invisible boundary between remembrance and revival. Once recognized, the night could no longer proceed unchanged. The reception concluded without incident, yet its meaning had altered. The jewel remained physically present, but symbolically withdrawn, its story now active rather than historical. By the time they departed, the outcome had already been decided. The return hours later would not be sudden. It would be continuation, which leads to the most guarded part of the story, the message hidden in the necklace itself. Royal jewels are rarely decorative alone. They are language. The placement of stones can signal rank, alliances, forgiveness, or warning. Experts who examined the photographs noticed something extraordinary. The diamonds weren't symmetrical. One central stone sat deliberately misaligned, a historical signal once used to mark a contested claim inside the royal family. For centuries, the monarchy developed a vocabulary that could be spoken without a single word. Public ceremonies demanded restraint, yet messages still needed to travel between those who understood tradition. Placement, orientation, even the order of jewels worn together carried meaning. A brooch could reassure a rival court. A tiara could confirm favor. And occasionally a piece would carry something heavier, a reminder that inheritance was not always settled peacefully. The necklace fit into that older system of communication. The stones themselves were flawless, but the arrangement resisted harmony. The slight displacement of the central diamond interrupted the balance intentionally, not accidentally. To an ordinary observer, it was a detail lost in brilliance. To those raised within royal custom, it was unmistakable. The same pattern appeared in records tied to a moment when succession had been debated privately but resolved publicly without explanation. The jewel had once stood as silent acknowledgement that legitimacy had been questioned before being restored. That history connected directly to the woman who wore it last. Her place in the family had once implied future authority. When circumstances changed, the object she had been given became complicated. Wearing it affirmed belonging. Returning it suggested rejection, not of the institution itself, but of the role attached to it. The necklace therefore stopped being ornament and became message. Its survival in the reserve preserved not its beauty, but its meaning. Catherine reportedly recognized the implication quickly once its design was explained. She understood that wearing it publicly did more than honor tradition. It echoed a narrative about continuity after dispute, about acceptance after uncertainty. The symbolism would be invisible to most viewers, yet unmistakable to those within the family who knew its language. In that moment, the choice to keep wearing it became participation in a story she had not lived but could unintentionally revive. This explains why the reaction inside the palace remained restrained rather than surprised. Only senior members would notice the alignment. Only they would understand what its appearance implied about the present. Silence followed, not because the matter was insignificant, but because acknowledging it openly would confirm its meaning. The safest response was absence. No comment, no clarification, only quiet correction. Removing the necklace that night therefore addressed more than discomfort. It prevented interpretation. Leaving it visible risked allowing symbolism to attach itself to modern relationships. Taking it off limited the conversation before it began. The overnight return ensured the message ended before it could be read publicly or privately. And suddenly, the overnight return looked less like etiquette and more like a refusal, Sources say Catherine didn't sleep that night. Lights in her private study stayed on until nearly 2 a.m. Phone calls were placed to 2 senior advisors. Not the press office, the constitutional office. Then came the order. The necklace would not remain in her possession even until morning inventory. It would be returned immediately, logged personally, and never reassigned to her again. The distinction she sought was precise, not whether she could wear it again, but what keeping it meant. Within royal protocol, jewelry can be borrowed, inherited, or symbolically accepted. Borrowing carries no message. Inheriting binds legacy. Symbolic acceptance sits somewhere more complicated. It confirms alignment with the history attached to the piece. Catherine reportedly asked which category applied. The answer, delivered carefully, implied the third. That difference mattered. A temporary loan ends when the evening ends. Symbolic acceptance continues beyond the event, attaching interpretation to future appearances. Wearing it again would not simply repeat a fashion choice, it would acknowledge continuity with the narrative embedded in the stones. Once understood that way, the object could no longer be neutral. Silence would become agreement. The emotional weight of certain jewels has long shaped royal decisions. Some pieces celebrate alliances. Others commemorate survival after crisis. This one represented resolution after conflict, but also the conflict itself. Keeping it until morning inventory would formalize possession, however brief. Returning it immediately prevented the moment from becoming recorded acceptance. The timing itself became part of the message. William's role remained consistent throughout the night and into the early hours. He did not overrule, but he affirmed. Advisors noted he supported speed rather than delay, reinforcing that hesitation might create interpretation. Together, they treated the situation less as etiquette and more as precedent. The longer it stayed, the more meaning accumulated. Removal ended accumulation. The palace response was strikingly swift. No committee review, no waiting period, no reconsideration. Approval came quickly, suggesting shared understanding. Institutions move slowly unless they recognize risk in delay. In this case, agreement indicated alignment between personal concern and institutional interest. Both sides preferred closure before narrative formed around the event. Yet closure required more than return. Staff connected to the handling were instructed to treat the movement as routine and avoid discussion entirely. Not denial, containment. The less said, the less interpreted. Within hours, the object had resumed its previous status, and the moment threatened to disappear into procedure. But meaning does not rely on official confirmation. Sometimes the absence of explanation amplifies it. A jewel worn publicly and returned privately creates its own record, carried not in archives, but in memory. And memory is difficult to control once curiosity begins. But the palace didn't deny the story. They erased it. Within 48 hours, official photo archives updated. The necklace vanished from captions. Press agencies replaced images. Even fashion reports were edited to remove its description. Not corrected. Removed. To the public, it became a styling detail. But internally, courtiers were warned never to request it again for future engagements. The change happened quietly enough that casual observers barely noticed. Headlines remained intact. Events unchanged. The evening still recorded as a success. Yet the details surrounding it began to shift. Early coverage mentioned the unfamiliar jewel, sometimes with curiosity, sometimes with excitement. Later versions spoke only of attire, posture, diplomacy. Anything except the object that had dominated conversation hours before. The absence felt deliberate, as though the narrative had been gently guided away from a specific memory. Agencies rarely alter records without clarification, but this time, clarification never arrived. Editors replaced images not because they were inaccurate, but because they revealed too much. Wider shots gave way to tighter frames. Descriptions shortened. The story survived, yet a key element dissolved within it. Over time, newer audiences would never know there had been anything unusual to begin with. Inside the institution, however, the moment was not ignored. Staff received quiet direction regarding future planning. The necklace would not be included in rotation, not even considered among optional pieces. Its status shifted from dormant to restricted again, a category reserved for items acknowledged but not discussed. No written explanation accompanied the instruction. The reason was understood rather than stated. Royal watchers noticed patterns long before confirmation. Coordinated edits across multiple outlets rarely occur by coincidence. The alignment suggested communication, not public, but effective. Those familiar with the palace recognized the method, not denial, but narrowing attention until curiosity lost its subject. If a detail cannot be openly contradicted, it can be gradually detached from relevance. The jewel returned to its previous tier within the reserve, catalogued yet inaccessible. Its brief appearance became an incident recorded only in internal memory. Not scandal, not controversy. Simply an occurrence too sensitive to formalize. The institution had neither confirmed nor refuted meaning, leaving interpretation suspended. Such restraint carries its own message. A monarchy built on continuity rarely reacts strongly to insignificance. The careful removal of reference signals importance without admission. By avoiding discussion, the palace acknowledged impact while preventing explanation. The story therefore persisted in the only place it could, between observation and silence. And that leaves the final question. Not why she returned it, but what message she sent by doing so. In royal tradition, wearing a jewel is acceptance. Removing it publicly is discomfort. But returning it overnight, before ceremony, before documentation, before history can record it, is something else entirely. It is neither rebellion nor obedience. It is distance. And sometimes, in a family where words echo for centuries, distance is the loudest message possible. The act did not challenge the institution. It clarified position within it. Royal symbolism rarely allows direct refusal, yet it permits interpretation through timing. By returning the necklace before formal inventory, Catherine avoided both possession and rejection in the traditional sense. She did not criticize the past attached to it, nor did she embrace it. Instead, she created separation, acknowledging history without inheriting its meaning. That distinction matters in a system where objects carry continuity. Every piece passed forward suggests agreement with the narrative it represents. Accepting some jewels affirms unity after conflict. Accepting others confirms permanence after uncertainty. This one carried a memory of dispute resolved through silence. Keeping it would quietly align the present with that resolution. Sending it back prevented the present from repeating the past. The decision reflected a modern boundary. The monarchy evolves not only through laws but through personal interpretation of its symbols. Catherine's response demonstrated that participation does not require reenactment. Respect for tradition can exist alongside refusal to revive its unresolved tensions. She did not alter the institution's authority. She refined her relationship to it. Observers within the palace recognized the nuance immediately. No correction followed because none was required. The absence of objection revealed agreement. The crown did not insist, and she did not resist. Instead, both sides moved forward as if the message had been understood privately. Adaptation often happens quietly in institutions built on stability. Public change appears dramatic. Internal adjustment appears seamless. The necklace itself returned to stillness. Not retired with ceremony, not displayed with explanation, simply withheld again. Its meaning preserved without repetition. In doing so, it became more significant than when worn. A visible jewel speaks for an evening. An unworn one speaks across years. What remained was not controversy, but precedent. Power within the monarchy has long been expressed through possession. Crowns held, titles granted, heirlooms transferred. This moment suggested another form of authority: restraint. Choosing not to adopt a symbol can shape the future as effectively as embracing one. Silence can guide direction where proclamation cannot. The legacy therefore rests less in the object and more in the decisions surrounding it. By declining its narrative, Catherine defined her own. The crown continued unchanged, yet subtly repositioned. The past stayed acknowledged, but not repeated. And in that balance between continuity and distance, a modern monarchy revealed how it intends to endure, not by rewriting history, but by deciding which parts it will carry forward. The necklace still exists, locked away beneath the palace. But its brief appearance may have revealed more about the future of the crown than a century of ceremonies ever could.